As promised, the apothecary came the next morning with a poultice for Evelyn's hand. When Evelyn asked about the sleeping draught, the older woman looked at Evelyn sideways. "Whatever for?" the apothecary asked. "Nightmares?" Evelyn replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Lifting a brow, the apothecary took a small clear bottle from her leather satchel. "1 or 2 drops will be enough to ensure a deep sleep. Any more than that, you may not wake for a day or more." "I'll be careful," though Evelyn didn't intend to use the draught on herself at all. After the apothecary left, Evelyn spent the rest of the day in the solar, reading a book by the windows. Or at least, her book lay open in her lap, but her attention was on the township below. Dressed in snow and adorned in icicles, the city glittered. Smoke danced from chimneys. People bustled through the street, greeting, hollering, and haggling in the market stalls. Well-dressed servants hurried to and fro. Children chased one another through the alleyways, laughing. And Evelyn, trapped in the castle, could only sit and watch them. What would happen when they remembered their lost daughters? Would they rise up and tear down the castle walls? Would they demand Cassander's head for his crimes? Or would they accept their fate and do nothing at all? She lifted the draught bottle to the light, turning it to refract the weak winter sunlight. It would be difficult to slip even a few drops into Cassander's drink. The man was cautious to a fault. But if she could manage that, perhaps she could fulfill her half of the witch's bargain too. Assuming, of course, that memories of the dead stirred the townsfolk to action. After dinner, Evelyn had the chamberlain bring a fresh brewed pot of tea to the solar. The man set the tea tray on the room's sideboard table. Evelyn rose from her seat. As the chamberlain turned to draw the drapes over the windows, she slipped to draw out the bottle from her sleeve, uncorked it with her thumb, and put 3 drops of the clear liquid in one of the teacups. Enough, she hoped, to knock Cassander senseless for an evening. As Cassander entered the room, Evelyn made a show of pouring herself tea. He paused on the threshold, staring at her. The air prickled with static, making the little hairs on her arms stand on end. Her heart beat a little harder. She glanced at the chamberlain, who had gone still. "He can't know," Evelyn told herself. "Can he?" "Tea?" she asked Cassander, trying not to sound too eager. "Yes, please." Cassander glanced at the chamberlain, who hadn't moved. He frowned, then said, "The apothecary came today, did she not?" "She did," Evelyn said, pouring a second cup of tea. "And what did she prescribe?" Cassander asked as he settled into his chair by the fire. "Exactly what you asked for," Evelyn replied. "A poultice and a sleeping draught." Cassander lifted the teacup to his lips, inhaling its rising steam, then set it back on the saucer. He looked at her, eyes narrowing, as if he could flay her with a single glance. The fire in the hearth went cold. Time seemed to slow, and the chamberlain remained frozen by the window, one hand still twisted in the drapes. "What did you do to my tea, Evelyn?" Cassander asked. "Nothing," she replied. "I'm well aware that you don't like sugar or cream." "That is not what I'm asking," Cassander said, his voice so low it could have scraped the marrow from her bones. He rose from his chair, hurling his teacup to the ground. Evelyn recoiled. "What did you do to my tea?" Evelyn crawled out of the settee, putting the chair between them. I don't know what you're talking about." "Do not lie to me again," Cassander said in a half-growl. He stalked across the room and grabbed Evelyn by her upper arm. When she tried to twist away from him, he dug his fingers into her flesh, drawing a pained cry from her lips. "You put the sleeping draught in my tea, didn't you?" he asked, giving her a hard shake. Her head snapped back, sending a hot bolt of pain down her spine. He pulled her close, giving her no room to think, nor even to breathe. "Why?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "This reeks of a howitzer plot." Cassander dug his fingers into her flesh. the timbre of his voice hitting the eardrums like thunder. "What dealings have you had with the swampland witches? Tell me!" With a shriek, Evelyn pushed him away and stumbled back, catching herself on the window behind her. The icy pain shuddered under the weight, but held. "I've done nothing wrong," Evelyn snapped. "Unlike you, I have not sent countless women to their deaths." "If you're working with the Hauser, you would send me to mine? They are enemies of everything living, Evelyn, and without my protection, the people in these townships will suffer." "You expect me to take pity on my murderer?" she spat, stepping toward him. Her breath sawed at her throat, painful and sharp. She swallowed down tears and said, "You have already condemned me with a babe in my womb." Cassandra's eyes widened. He took a half step back, his jaw slack, as if Evelyn had reached out and physically slapped him. The color drained from his face. You're pregnant?" Cassandra asked her, his voice barely above a whisper. She answered him with a glare. "Whatever the witches have told you, it is a lie. No matter what I do to protect my wives, the Hawazir always finds a way to curse them. Each and every time, who do you think is responsible for the infection now spreading across your skin?" Evelyn glanced down at her bandaged hand. "And knowing that, you still take more women from the township. You make the people forget us, so that they don't rise up and depose you." He narrowed his eyes and dropped his chin, glaring down at her. "Do you think the Hawazar will help you? They help no one but themselves." "At least they won't ask me to give my life for a child I neither wanted nor asked for." Anger flashed through Cassandra's eyes. He stepped forward, lifting a hand. Evelyn's chin quivered, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. If he was going to strike her, he would do it while looking her in the eye. "Do it," Evelyn said. "But if you would strike me, do it in the gut, where your blow might be of some use." He blew out a breath, then dropped his hand to his side. "You will not leave your rooms until the child is born," he said, taking her by the arm, dragging her into the hall. "If the child is healthy, and if you survive, I will decide what to do with you then." Cassandra locked her inside her chambers. When he was gone, Evelyn grabbed the vase that held her dried wedding bouquet and hurled it against the wall. Shards of porcelain and clumps of withered petals tumbled to the ground. Evelyn collapsed on the floor and wept, not in sadness, but in frustration, in fury. At first, her sobs shook her whole body. As she quieted, Evelyn heard an unfamiliar rustling noise. The sores of the back of her hand pulsated and burned. Wiping her eyes with the tips of her fingers, she glanced up. Movement drew her gaze to the pile of shattered porcelain and petals on the floor. The pile writhed, rising and falling as if it had its own heartbeat. Dread reached cold fingers through Evelyn's chest. Shivering, she crawled toward the wilted roses and brittle leaves. Plucking a large shard of porcelain from the pile, she cleared the debris away. The flowers disintegrated to the touch, dry and dusty. And then Evelyn saw the thorn. It wasn't a snub-nosed rose thorn. This one was as long as a needle. Trembling, Evelyn pushed more of the flowers aside, revealing a dry, leathery vine that twisted like a corkscrew. Evelyn had seen such vines before, wrapped around the rafters in the witch's cottage. "No matter what I do to protect my wives," Cassandra's voice echoed in her head, "the Hawazar always finds ways to curse them, each and every time." The vine spasmed. His putrid flesh oozed pus. Evelyn's skin rippled in response, as if something thorny and sharp wanted to push its way out, treating her body like a fertile grounds of the swamplands, feeding on her blood and sapping the strength from her bones. With a shriek, Evelyn kicked the vine into the fireplace. She took a shot of the sleeping draught and watched it burn. Days passed in a haze. Evelyn curled up by her bedroom windows, too empty to cry. By day, she watched the townsfolk go about their business, each one ignorant to the horrors in the castle above. By night, Evelyn used her brooch pins to try to pick the lock on her bedroom door. Failing that, she took to searching the room's nooks and crannies, hoping to find a secret escape. She used candles to try to draw the attention of the townsfolk below, plotted to take one of the maids hostage, and even considering climbing out through the chimney. In her most desperate moments, Evelyn dreamt her way back into the witch's swamp, only to find herself lost, wandering. In the realms of dreams, the swamps teetered on the verge of twilight. Sometimes, Evelyn hid from the great, broken-backed stags, ones that walked on their hind legs. Other times, she sneaked past men whose bodies were threaded with thorny vines. Many tired mushrooms sprouted from their faces or torsos, and their skin had turned leathery and grey. They stumbled to and fro, blind. Some nights, Evelyn saw the pale-haired boy in the swamps too. Whenever she tried to approach him, he would fade into the shadows, silent as a ghost. But one night, almost a month after her confinement, Evelyn happened upon a group of mounted soldiers in the swamp. As she drew closer, she recognized the heavy fur coat slung over the horses' hindquarters, the men's tall black leather boots, and their standard-issue broadswords. Cassandra's men. What were they doing so far from home? It couldn't be a regular patrol. It took weeks to reach the swamplands on horseback. Besides, Cassandra's men had strict instructions to patrol the borders of his lands, but not beyond them. If she dreamt true, it meant Cassandra had dispatched men after he'd learned about the baby. The thought made Evelyn hate him no less. He cared only for a healthy child, not for her at all. Evelyn was merely a vessel, a means to an end, and nothing more. So Evelyn did not shout a warning as the swamp rose to meet the men. Rotting hands and worming vines reached from the murk. 10, 20, 100 of them. They grasped the horses' legs and dragged the screaming creatures down, unseating their riders. Bones cracked, thunderous as a rumbling ice sheet. Torches hit the water and drowned. Men shrieked as they were swallowed up by the shadows, then dragged into the swamp depths. A few bubbles popped against the water surface, and all went still. How many people would Cassandra send to their deaths for this? How could one life, yet unborn, mean more than her own? How could it mean more than the lives of the men who had been swallowed by the swamp? Evelyn found no answers in her dreams. Months passed. She lost track of the days. Her stomach swelled. The infection spread up the back of her hand, poking her flesh with sores, scabs, and blisters. Unless she could find a way to satisfy the witch, Evelyn was likely to become one of the shambling creatures from her dreams. There was no escape, no hope. Until one night, Evelyn dreamt of a door. She stood in the darkened castle hallway, alone. A small amount of light echoed through the windows at her back. The dust hung thick in the air, coating her lips and tongue with a chalky residue. The carpet underfoot felt stiff with disuse, and Evelyn flinched at something large and many-legged crawled over her bare foot. She kicked it away. Evelyn hadn't dreamt of the castle before. She looked left, then right, but the darkness hung like thick tapestries on either side. Cassandra's servants would not follow her into her dreams. Reaching out, Evelyn ran fingers over the figures carved into the door's surface. On one side, angels bore shining swords, their wings streaming behind them. On the other, hulking demons roared their defiance, backed by flame. Two figures stood in their midst, an archangel and a demoness, locked in an embrace. The door told a story Evelyn hadn't heard before, one that must have been ancient. From somewhere beyond, a baby wailed. Frowning, Evelyn placed her hand on the door, covering the lovers with her palm. The muscles in her arm spasmed. She gasped in pain as something prickled her flesh from the inside, writhing like a worm. It broke through her skin once, twice, then 3 times, shredding the bandages wrapped around her wrist. Swamp vines growing from her hand. The tendrils reached for the door, growing thicker by the breath, their tips burrowing into the crevices and breaking through the wood, searching, tearing, cracking, releasing something that had been entombed. Evelyn couldn't hear the other women's voices now, rushing out from the cracks in the door in a rising chorus of pain and terror. 10, 20, then 100 of them, all singing an aria of birth and death. The voices cried out for vengeance, swirling through her and past her, eternal and yet evanescent as they dissipated into the realm of her dreams. The door crumbled before her, broken by the vines that grew from her arm. On the other side, there was naught but darkness. "Evelyn, what have you done?" a man snarled. Startled, Evelyn pivoted on her heel. Cassandra stalked down the hall, his features twisted with fury and fear. "What have you done?" he shrieked. The window pane shattered, sending razor-sharp glass flying in all directions. Evelyn screamed as she dropped into a half-crouch, protecting her head with her arms. And then she woke with a sob, sitting up in her bed. The fire had burned low, throwing strange shadows over her walls. Sweat plastered her hair and her forehead. She struggled to catch her breath. Her heart pounded in her ears, and the tips of her fingers behind her eyes. "It was just a dream," she told herself, even as a tremor rolled through her muscles. She pulled her knees against her chest, and a single tear escaped down her cheek. One of the shadows in the room twitched. She lifted her head. The pale-haired boy stepped into the light, cocking his head at her. "Come!" The boy inhaled as he spoke the word, stretching out the vowels in unnatural ways. His pitch rose and fell in the wrong places, the air playing his vocal cords like an out-of-tune instrument. He beckoned to her, then pointed to the bedroom door that hung ajar. A single key remained in the lock. "Come where?" Evelyn whispered. The boy took hold of one of the twigs in his eye socket and rolled it between the thumb and index finger. He tore it out with a fleshy, wet rip. He snapped the twig in half, dropping its pieces to the floor. A heartbeat passed in silence. Before Evelyn could ask anything more, shouts echoed in the distance. She kicked her blankets away and stepped out of bed, hurrying to the windows. Below the castle, the township blazed like a hellish inferno. No, wait! It wasn't the township that burned. Hundreds of people marched through the streets, their torches bright. Men pounded the gates with a battering ram. "They remember," Evelyn whispered, a gasp catching her throat. "Hurry," the boy croaked. "No time." The township's cavalry would come too late to save her, but perhaps Evelyn could still save herself. With another glance at the door, Evelyn threw open her armoire. She found her warmest clothes by the weak light of the hearth, long woolen undergarments, a fur-lined shift, 2 pairs of thick woolen socks, and her heaviest petticoats under the quilted dress. It may have been spring, but the fractured peaks wouldn't know warmth until midsummer. As she pulled on good, heavy boots, she heard Cassandra shout, "Evelyn!" The boy said, beckoning to her again. Evelyn snatched a bottle of sleeping draught off the table and followed the boy from the room. The hallway beyond lay empty, dark. "You little fool!" Cassandra's voice floated toward them. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She turned to face the sound of Cassandra's voice. He stepped into an island of light, a naked sword glinting in his hand. Evelyn froze. Perhaps it was the dim quality of the moonlight, but she almost didn't recognize him. He looked taller, somehow broader. Dressed in dark robes with his silver hair unbound, he looked like an avenging warrior, but the malice he exuded lodged itself in Evelyn's chest. No chivalrous force could feel so cruel. Beside her, the pale-haired boy faded into the gloom. Evelyn eased back a step, drawing the bottle still in hand. "First, I catch you plotting with witches," Cassandra said, cocking his head. And now I found you consorting with monsters. I suppose I've developed a taste for them, Evelyn replied, taking another step back. After all, I had one in my bed not so long ago. Did you now? Cassandra's lips curved like a reaper's sickle. Then let me show you how monstrous I can be. He leapt toward her, disappearing into the shadows of the hall. The vibration of his footsteps sent tremors through the stone floor. Evelyn shrieked. Grabbing hold of her skirts, she turned and fled. She sprinted down the hall, keeping one hand on her swollen belly, avoiding the windows' light. Her breath ached in her throat, and her legs, long unused to such activity, burned with each step. Evelyn darted around a corner, not daring to look over her shoulder. Her mind ran as fast as her feet. She wouldn't be able to outrun Cassandra for long, not while pregnant. How could she even hide? Cassandra knew the castle better than she. Perhaps she could use the shadows to her advantage and take him by surprise. Topple a suit of armor in his path, or run him through with one of the swords on display in the great hall. Pain exploded across the back of Evelyn's scalp. Cassandra grabbed her by the hair and yanked her off her feet. She shrieked. Bright red lights burst across her vision. Before she could take another breath, Cassandra grabbed her by the front of her dress, lifted her bodily, and slammed her against the wall. Her teeth rattled in her skull. Something cracked in her back and shot a white-hot pain through her ribcage, spearing the right side of her chest. This time, Evelyn didn't have the breath to scream. Contrary to your opinion, I don't enjoy watching my women die, Cassandra growled, using his arm, shoulder, and hip to keep her pressed against the wall. Her toes did not touch the ground. But you, well, you may be somewhat of an exception. Evelyn struggled to breathe. Everything in her chest felt like it had caught fire. With what little oxygen she could draw in, she cursed him. Cassandra threw back his head and laughed. The sound echoed down the castle halls. Something within Evelyn broke. How she hated this man. The one who had turned her world upside down and made her life into a perfect nightmare. Who would mock her as she fought for her life. Who would laugh as she struggled to breathe. How dare he laugh? How dare he make light of the fear and pain he forced her to suffer? With fury running hot in her veins, Evelyn smashed a draught bottle into the wall. Lifting her arm, she stabbed its broken shards into his throat, right above his collarbone. Cassandra's laugh died in a strangled wheeze. Hot blood spattered over Evelyn's hand. The man staggered. His sword clattered to the ground. Evelyn drove the glass ever deeper, soaking her bandages in his blood. Feeding something cruel, dark, and horrible deep within her. Something that burst from the flesh of her hand and wrapped itself around Cassandra's throat, drawing tight. Vines. What? He gasped. But before he could finish the word, his legs went out under him. They tumbled to the floor. Evelyn landed atop the man. Her right arm extended over her head. A fresh lance of pain shot through her chest. She tried to tug her hand away, but couldn't. Cassandra spasmed, then lay still. His heart still beat beneath her cheek, weakly. Wincing, Evelyn propped herself on her elbow and looked up. In the hallway's dim light, she could barely make out the encircling vines that cuffed Cassandra's throat. With a sob, she tried a third time to tug her hand free. She only succeeded in driving the thorns deeper into her flesh. Delirious with pain, Evelyn could hardly lift her head when the boy appeared from the shadows. Was it just her imagination, or did the boy grin? Did his teeth gleam, and had they been so sharp-looking before? As Evelyn's consciousness began to fade, the boy took hold of Cassandra's feet and dragged them both into the darkness. Evelyn woke lying flat on a hard, rough surface. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt leaden. Every muscle and sinew in her right arm ached. Pain hammered on the inside of her skull. She winced, turning her head to one side. Fire crackled somewhere on the right, filling the room with a choking scent of wood smoke. "Oh, you're awake," a familiar voice said. "You did well, my child, in bringing me both Cassander and his unborn babe." Evelyn groaned. Cool air caressed the bare, swollen flesh of her belly. She shivered, but then she tried to reach down to cover her exposed skin. She realized her hands were bound. "What?" was all Evelyn managed to croak. "What's happening?" "Shh," the witch said. "Take a breath now." A blade bit into Evelyn's abdomen, cutting deep. Pain exploded in her every extremity, erupting from her lips on a scream. Her eyes cracked open. The animal in her tried to tear free of her bindings, to twist away from the agony. But her hands and feet were held fast by vines, the same ones that twisted in the rafters overhead. She lay on the witch's wooden table. The witch stood over her, silhouetted in the firelight, carving a bright red gash into Evelyn's belly. Blood splashed in fast, hot rivulets down Evelyn's side. Her vision swam, and her next breath was a ragged, beating sob. "Once more," the witch said, then cut the incision wider. The pain shot up Evelyn's spine and hit the base of her skull like a battering ram. Evelyn screamed so loud she thought her ribs might crack from the force of it, or perhaps the heavens would shatter and tumble down to the earth below. She arched her back, every muscle straining, the pain eating away at her sanity. "Please, stop," Evelyn sobbed. Tears gushed from the corners of her eyes, hot and fast as her blood. "Please." "Shh," the witch said, reaching into Evelyn's flesh. Evelyn felt something loosen in her abdomen. A small cry filled the cottage. The witch took an infant from Evelyn's body. A perfect child, a boy child, a human child, and cradled him against her breast. The child's cries carved into Evelyn's heart. She wanted to reach for him, but couldn't. "That's not what you said it would be," Evelyn managed to say. "A baby. Give me my baby." "You'll die before long," the witch replied. "You," Evelyn said, nearly blind from the pain. "You did this to me, didn't you? The thorn in my bouquet, the nightmares." "I used you, yes," the witch said, using the bloodied knife to slice through the umbilical cord. "But then again, so did he." The witch stepped aside. There, sitting atop a stack of books, was Cassander's severed head. His blood stained their covers, turning black in the shadows. Perhaps she had gone mad with pain, but Evelyn swore Cassander's eyes blinked. "He will make good on his promise now," the witch said, carrying the infant over to the makeshift cradle on the other side of the room. "Cassander was an ancient. Did you know that? Such secrets he will tell." Evelyn's world began to darken. "Just before, give him to me." "What's that, child?" the witch asked, looking over her shoulder. "You wish to live?" Evelyn's lips parted, barely able to form the next word. Her breath was failing, her heartbeat growing ever frailer as her life's blood spilled across the floor. "I can still save you," the witch said, her smile widening. "For a price."